Hey, welcome in everyone. This is another week, another edition, another episode of you guessed it, you're on YouTube at That 70s Pod. That's That 70s Pod with Bryan Lee. Andrew here in Florida. Cold, raining. It's snowing in Houston, it's snowing in Atlanta, it's snowing in Oklahoma. I know it's snowing up there in Wisconsin. And we're just getting a lot of rain, a lot of cold, a lot of winds. So I'm cold here. But I'm always excited to record and to be here. It is always a great time recording with you, Brian. How are you today?
Well, it is not snowing in Wisconsin, but it is 22 below, or it was this morning. It's a little better now, but the past 3 days we haven't been above zero, and even if there's a little bit of wind, that drops that wind chill factor to somewhere around 30 or 40 below. So, definitely been cold in the upper Midwest, and it makes driving interesting because you have to let your car warm up for a good 10-15 minutes before you can take off. Fortunately, I rent a house that has a heated garage. So my car is always a nice balmy 57 degrees when I jump into it and start it in the morning and go out into the cold. The only problem is when I go to work, then it sits outside and gives me a little bit of trouble when I leave work to start it up again. But right now it's in my toasty warm garage and it'll be ready to go in the morning. And speaking of driving, I was recently watching an episode of The Goldbergs. It's a show that based on things that happened in the 80s, sort of a real life sitcom written by Adam Goldberg, the real Adam Goldberg. And my wife and I enjoy watching this show. And they recently did an episode about learning to drive and getting that first car. And I thought, we all have memories of that. And today on that 70s pod, we're going to go back to 1978 when I was a sophomore in high school, Andrew, and I took a driver education class. Um, I don't remember the name of the instructor. I know Chuck Mells was part of the group. You probably are familiar with Chuck Mells. I think he was still around when you were in high school. Um, but anyway, taking that driver's ed class, getting a permit, learning, doing on or behind the wheel training, and then practicing on my own with relatives, and eventually getting my own driver's license and my own car. And like I said, everybody's got a story. Everyone's got a memory of learning how to drive and getting their first car. And I thought that would be a good program today for that 70s.
I don't know who Chuck Mills is. No idea. Don't know if he worked for the school district or not. But that's interesting that you talk about, heated garage, your car. I mean, I have a car. A lot of people, I've been told, listen to this. A handful of people said they listen to this while they're driving in their car. And yes, we do. We kind of tribute this show to the television show That 70 or That 70s show, and which that states right away, season one, episode one, Eric being so proud of his Vista Cruiser. I don't remember if they said where he got it from or if that was maybe it was like a gift in the first episode, but like that was such like oh, that's what a car is in the 70s. This is what a teenager feels about his car, his possession in the 70s. I did not have a car when I was in high school. And that's okay. And like, but like seeing like that importance of it, that was almost like people, oh, that's my Batcave. Like that's my Batmobile type deal. So take us back. What year are we on? And what's your memory of your first car?
Well, in 1978, I was wrapping up second semester my sophomore year, and that's when we would be eligible as long as we were going to turn 16 years old during that semester. We could take the classroom of driver's ed in high school. Now they don't do that anymore in New Richmond. I don't know how other school districts do it, but back in the 70s, Andrew, you could actually take the classroom portion of driver's ed as a high school class and get a credit for it, or it might have been a half a credit. I really don't remember. Plus, while you're earning that high school credit, you're also getting yourself prepared to take the written test to get a permit. So it was a nice, neat and tidy way to to get your classroom portion of driver's training out of the way, get a credit in high school, get your permit, and then at the end of the second semester, when all that stuff is wrapped up, all the paperwork part of it, then you have the whole summer to do your driver's training. It was a really smart way to do things, and I know they don't do it that way anymore. But back in the 70s, looking back on it now, it was a really cool way that they did it, and I'm glad they did it that way because it worked out. You know, I turned 16 during the second semester. Um, I got an A in the class. I got my permit on my first try, taking the written test. Um, and I think we had to go down to the New Richmond civic offices to do that. And and then I was scheduled to start my driving portion of getting a license. Um, in the latter part of June, there was a lot of students ahead of me. I'm not sure if they went by birth date or what they went by, but I had to wait till almost the end of June, and I remember it was 3 days a week. And not to get too much ahead of myself here, but uh, I had to do my training 3 days a week, and where most of the students they did two at a time, where one would drive for an hour and a half, and then somebody in the back seat would come up and drive for the other hour and a half, while the person that drove first would have to go in the back seat and observe. I didn't have to do that. I was at the end of the day, and I was the only one. So I drove for an hour and a half, and I didn't have to sit and watch somebody else drive. So that was really cool too. It just worked out just splendidly for me, until some unforeseen things happened, and I'll get back to that in a little bit. But Andrew, by the time you did driver's training, you didn't get to do it through the high school. I think you had to go to a separate entity to do that, correct?
That is correct. Yes, my oldest brother or my older brother Eric did it through the high school during summer vacation because we would wake up, watch The Price is Right, and then he would come home with us, watch the rest of The Price is Right, and tell us about his driver's ed class. By the time I was in high school, that was not a thing. Not even during the summertime, they did not do that anymore. So, off of Main Street, I want to say it was Sixth Street or Sixth Avenue or something like that. I went to a driver's ed school right there. Took it so serious because it was so interesting to me how like we all had to be middle school and high school because we had to. But this was a place where it was a school where we wanted to. There was still certain people that wanted to like make fun and like waste time. Um Rest in peace, a kid named Bob that was in my younger brother's class. He was in my driver's ed class. And I always got along with Bob. And like, so he wanted to be the class clown. He was really funny, but he like aced every test. Like he was so good at it. And I was like, man, he doesn't even take anything serious. And he's like passing this, like, no problem. So yeah, mine was a separate thing. Really took it serious. Appreciate all the time that you drove around with me. Um, but did not get a car. So you took class in high school. You had your drive time in high school. You did everything within. Is this in Minnesota, by the way?
No, it was in Wisconsin. It was in New
Okay.
Richmond.
Okay. Sounds good. So like, did you back then have to do a permit, like a written test, and then a permit test, and then wait 6 months to take your behind the wheel driver's license test?
No, like I said, we took the class in the second semester of my sophomore year, and that prepared us to take the written test to get our permit, and then we just had to wait. Um, we just had to wait our turn because there was a long list of people that had to go ahead of me, and again, I think they went by birth dates. So I started. Maybe it was 3 weeks after school had ended for that year, and I remember it was the end of June, because I did my training for like 3 weeks behind the wheel training, and I remember my instructor. His name was Bob Peterson, and I didn't do too good my first day. I was really shaky, and fortunately, he had a brake on his side of the car, so that was good because I almost ran into a parked car. So my very first day didn't go very well, and it was in kind of a big car, and I don't know if it was a substitute car that day because we did the rest of my training in sort of like a Ford Pinto wagon. And they don't make those anymore, but it was a good car to learn how to drive in, and I got really good at it and got really smooth, and I remember we were talking about Wimbledon because that was about the time when Wimbledon was going, and Bob Peterson, my instructor, was going, you think Bjorn Borg is going to do it again? And he's already won it three in a row. And I said, I don't know, man. It's pretty tough to do four. And and then we were talking about the women's side, and I said, I want Chrissy to win, Chris Everett, my favorite women's tennis player. And he said, oh, she was knocked out today in the semifinals. Man, and I think it was by Martina Navratilova or Virginia Wade or something. So, um, so we talked a lot of sports while driving, and Bob taught me how to drive through the New Richmond School District and drivers training, and I completed my 3 weeks, and he said keep practicing, and you can go for your license in 2 weeks and be driving before the start of your junior year. So that's how the process went, Andrew. Taking taking the classroom, getting a credit for it through the high school, getting my permit, then doing behind the wheel, and had all that done by about mid July. So I still had about 6 weeks to get my license before the start of my junior year, but things didn't work out so well. And I'll explain what happened. Is First of all, my dad really didn't have a car for me to drive. He had this blue 1966 Chev that really it's a Chevrolet Impala, and he had it for a lot of years, but it wasn't in the best of shape. So I asked my grandparents, who lived in Star Prairie. They had this nice maroon car, and I asked them if I could practice in their car. So my grandma came along with me, and I did pretty good, I think. And then when I got it back to the house, I was practicing backing out of the driveway, and I bumped into this sort of it was a decoration. It was like this wheelbarrow thing, okay? And I got it caught between the wheel well and the wheel, and started dragging this thing as I was backing out of the driveway, and bent the frame of the car straight out, and I just freaked. I got out of the car, and I saw how the frame of the wheel well had bent out away from the wheel and was hooked onto this wheelbarrow ornament thing. And and my grandparents were really nice. They said, that's okay. We bump that thing all the time. We should move it. And I go, yeah, but I wrecked your car. And, they basically, my grandpa was out there with his one arm, and he bent it back in, and he said, it's fine. And, they were real cool about it. But I didn't want to drive their car anymore after that because they had this nice car, and I wrecked it. And, and so then I called my Aunt Diane, and she said, "Yeah, I'll take you driving." And uh, and so she came and picked me up one day, and she said, "Well, I got to tell you something, that this is the only time we'll be able to do this because my husband told me that our insurance doesn't cover you driving the car." And and so it'll kind of be a one and done thing. So I practiced with her for an hour or so, and I think I made her kind of nervous, but I didn't wreck the car or anything that time. And then I was practicing with this guy that used to bartend for my dad, and I think his name was George Milliron, and and one of his grandkids was somebody I graduated with. Later became a cop in Richmond, Tony Milliron, and so I was driving his car, and he said, "Yeah, I don't mind if you drive my car, and I'll ride with you, but I don't have any power steering." So I'm driving this car, learning how to drive with no power steering, and that was a little scary because you really had to handle that car a certain way to avoid. I almost hit a railing on a bridge because you had to really crank the wheel to avoid hitting things. So it was just kind of one escapade after another, Andrew, of not really knowing um, how to get better because I was driving all these different vehicles and I didn't really have my own car to practice in, or my dad didn't have a car for me. So eventually I did take the test right before school started, and I used my grandparents' car again. They said it was okay. And I can remember the instructor. His last name was Pabst, like the beer, Pabst Blue Ribbon beer. And he came out and he said, "Okay, I'll stand in front of the car, flip on the headlights, and okay, flip the left blinker, the right blinker, do the horn." He had to inspect the vehicle before we could go, and he said, "Okay, turn on the bright lights." And I said, "What?" And he said, "Turn on the bright lights." And I didn't know what he was talking about. I mean, I knew what bright lights were, but I didn't know how to turn them on because I had done no practicing at night. And finally, I saw this switch on the floor, so I hit my foot with it and got the bright lights to come on. And so he said, "Okay, that's good." And then we drove around for like 10, 15 minutes, and and I did okay when I tried my parallel park. I was too far away from the curb, and something else I did was just not really acceptable, and so I wound up failing the test, Andrew. And I was really disappointed, and I lost confidence. I didn't even want to drive anymore. So I went into my junior year of high school, and I still didn't have a driver's license and didn't even really care. I did. My brother used to give me a ride to school, and he was all excited that he wouldn't have to drive me anymore. But he wound up driving me for most of my junior year. Um, Matter of fact, all of my junior year, because it wasn't until the following summer when I finally got my license. My dad bought another 1966 Chevrolet Impala. This one was a brown one, and so I started practicing with that um, after the winter of my junior year was pretty much done. I started practicing more. I think my dad was or my mom were well. It couldn't be my mom because it had to be a licensed driver. So I think my dad rode with me most of the time, and I practiced and practiced and practiced in my Chevrolet Impala, and didn't have any seatbelts in the car, which was another interesting story because when I took my second test, this would have been a year later in the summer of '79 now, and the instructor, who was a different guy, got in and I said, "I'm sorry, there's no seatbelts in this car. My dad bought it." And he was kind of looking around. He said, "It looks like somebody cut him out of here." And I said, "Yeah, I don't know." So, but he still let me take the test without any seatbelts in the car, which was so funny. And that time I passed, and the instructor said, "No, I did a pretty good job." And he told my dad, "You probably should look into getting some seatbelts in that car for him, though." And my dad never did, but that's how it took over a year, Andrew. But I finally got my driver's license, and I had my first car in the process. I'm one of those few people that had a car before I had my driver's license because my dad bought that Chevrolet Impala primarily for me.
Okay, so tell me about this Chevrolet.
Well, it was a brown four-door car, um, just a boat of a car. I mean, it was big, and and I liked the way it handled, um, but sometime in, I want to say October, we're in my senior year now. This is 1979 in October, and I was driving this car home from school one day, and and all of a sudden the engine light came on, and I could smell something burning, and I pulled over on the side of the road. I was close to this this cement place. On my we lived in Boardman, about 5 miles from New Richmond, and I pulled over next to this cement place on my way home, and and I went to use a phone because we didn't have cell phones, and my dad said, "Well, did you check the oil?" And I said, "Well, no. How do you do that?" And I didn't know anything about this stuff. I just learned how to drive a car. I didn't know how to do maintenance on it. So I went, and he said there's this thing you pull out, and you see how much oil is on the stick, and you might have to add oil to it. So I went and checked the oil, and there was nothing on the stick. There was no oil on the stick. And so I called him again, and I said, "Yeah, there's no oil on the stick." And he said, "Oh boy, you might you might have burned the engine out." And I said, "Well, I'll catch a ride, and go back to New Richmond and get some oil." Um, so I wound up going back to New Richmond to this gas station that you used to work at, Andrew. Only it wasn't called Freedom; it was called Erickson Oil. But it was right next. It was in the same spot, right next to the grocery store, which was called Erickson's IGA at the time, and and I got a couple of quarts of oil, and a buddy of mine would worked at the gas station, so he said, "Here, you'll need a spout," because back then oils used to come in cans, and you had to jam this spout into it and then pour it into the car. Was it oil wasn't in a plastic container with a cap that you twisted off. They were in these cans that you had to jam a spout into, um, and then pour the oil out. So I went back to the car, put 2 quarts of oil in it, and it still didn't start. And so by that time, my dad had met me there, and we had to get the car towed because I burned out the engine. So I only had my driver's license for like a couple of months, Andrew, and only had this car for a short time. And I already burned out the motor, and the car needed a new motor because I didn't have brains enough to check the oil because nobody ever told me anything about checking the oil. So wasn't off to a really good start.
Did you say did you say it was an Impala sedan?
Uh, well, it was a 1966 Chevrolet Impala, and I don't know if you would. Yeah, I guess it would have been a sedan, um, but it was brown, and so my dad knew this mechanic who used to come into the bar that he owned. His name was Jerry Kimling, and they got the car up to where he worked on cars, and he proceeded to put a new engine in it, which took a couple of weeks. So in the meantime, my dad still had his blue 19 again a 1966 Chevrolet Impala. He had two of those, one blue, one brown. He still had the blue one. Yeah, that's the car. Um, he still had the blue one, and so I needed something to drive to school every day. So this blue one was not in the best of shape. And and one day, for whatever reason, instead of taking my normal way to school, um, I I took a little detour and went up by the golf course in New Richmond. Um, this would be approximately where First Lutheran Church is now, up by the golf course, and I had just gotten onto that road up there, and all of a sudden I heard a thump, and the car went. Yeah, I was holding on to the steering wheel, and the car went up in the air a little higher than should have been, and and I thought, God, what's going on here? And all of a sudden, the car comes crashing down on my side, on the driver's side, and as I crashed into the road, I see this wheel going bouncing down the road into the ditch, and I get out of the car and I go, "Hey, come back here!" and and I go running after this tire. The wheel came off the car as I was driving it, and so I go running after this tire, and I pull it out of the ditch. And as I'm walking back to the car, holding a tire with one arm, a buddy of mine just happened to be going that direction and, and pulled up behind me, and he, he just said, "Hey, what's going on? What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, my wheel fell off." And he said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm fine." And I said, "Could you go and get a tow truck or something for me?" And so he went and picked up his girlfriend and stopped at a gas station and gave him the general proximity of where I was, and he came back and told me, "Yeah, they'll be here in about a half an hour." And I said, "Well, when you get to the high school, can you go in the office and tell them why I'm going to be late?" And he said, "Yeah, will do." And he just said, "Take care. I got to get to school." So uh, his name was Dan Meshke, and he went and picked up his girlfriend, Teresa Hall. They wound up getting married, and as far as I know, are still married. And so anyway, he took care of all that for me, and and in about a half hour, 45 minutes, a tow truck came and said, "Lost the wheel, huh?" "Yeah." "What was your first clue?" And so he towed me to the gas station, and he said, "It looks like uh, your lug nuts are gone, and it looks like three of the bolts are gone." And I said, "Well, can you fix it?" And he said, "Oh yeah, yeah, I can fix it." And so I don't remember if I walked to school from the gas station or if he gave me a ride up to the high school. But anyway, I got to the school, and I don't know, maybe 2 hours late, and did my classes. And then at the end of the day, I called my dad from the school office and told him what happened, and that I would catch a ride with somebody to get home because now I've already wrecked two cars. So um, we uh, we eventually got the blue car back. They did fix it, and it was probably in better shape after I paid for it, a couple $100 to fix the wheel. Well, the wheel was actually fine. It just they had to put bolts and lug nuts back on the wheel so we could put the tire on there, and um, and then that worked pretty well for a while, and I drove that until I got the brown Impala back, and and then basically went through the rest of the school year without having any more problems, and drove myself to school, drove myself to work, and but yeah, that was my adventures, and from the point of mid 1978 to the end of 1980, uh, that was my adventures with learning how to drive, getting that first car, and some of the mishaps I had, burning out one engine, losing a wheel on a different car, and and but I kept driving. I knew I had to do it, and I didn't have the best cars to work with, and to this day, I drive cars that aren't in the best of shape. I do have one pretty good Toyota right now, For the most part, I've always, because of those experiences when I started driving, Andrew, having two different 1966 Chevrolet Impalas to drive, I've pretty much my entire life have just driven cars or vans until they wear out. I never have traded in a vehicle for a better vehicle because I always drive vehicles until they basically fall apart because that's how I learned it back in 1979.
Just out of curiosity, you said that story happened up by where, I mean, I know not everybody's gonna be aware of the New Richmond layout, but you said it was up by like where the golf course is. If you were heading to high school, why were you in that area?
Well, I went that direction, and I don't remember why I went that direction that day. But I think I was going to pick something up on that side of town, and I decided instead of going right through town that I would go around the long way. I really don't remember why I did that. I think maybe I had to drop off some paperwork at a place called the health center. Um, and again, I really don't remember exactly why I had to go that way that day, but it's very fortunate I did go that way because if I had been on one of the major roads and lost a wheel, it could have been a lot more of a tragic ending. If a semi would have been coming or something, or there was traffic coming both ways, that might have been a not so good situation. So going the way I did, it wasn't very well traveled back in the 70s, going back that way. So it was probably a good place for that to happen.
And so the wheel just snapped off, or like, was it the axle?
Well, again, the bolts, the
Gotcha.
lug nuts and the bolts had broken off. So um, don't really know when it happened. I didn't notice anything different when I was driving it. They just broke off. So um, that was my early experience. Um, then I went through my first winter driving and didn't have any trouble with that. Never slid into a ditch or anything like that. So, and I didn't have the best tires either, but I managed to get to school every day and really uh, I didn't really give rides to people. I remember hauling music equipment, my own musical equipment, up to the high school for towards the end of my senior year for a couple of different things. Um, but other than that, never had, after losing the wheel and burning out the engine on two different cars. It went pretty smooth after that. And my first complete year of driving a car was pretty uneventful after those two things happened. And after the long period of time it took just to get my license to begin with.
What would you say, even if we're not talking about the 70s, just random question, what would you say your favorite car is that you ever had?
Well, uh, I rented a brand new 1987 Dodge Omni when I lived in Alexandria. My wife and I had a lease. We didn't buy it. We leased it, and eventually couldn't make the payments on it anymore, so I had to give it back. But that was a really nice car. I've also had a couple of the first van we ever bought lasted a really long time, and we did a lot of traveling in that van when you guys were little, and that was really a smooth ride as well. So we've gotten some good vehicles over the years. It's like I said, uh, I usually drive them into the ground though, delivering pizzas or papers or whatever type of delivery I'm involved in at the time. Uh, Basically, cars, vans aren't meant for that sort of work. Not passenger vehicles anyway. If I had a cargo van, that would have been a different story. But um, yeah, I pretty much wreck vehicles with the different jobs I've had. But like I said at the top of the program, everyone has a story to tell or memories of learning how to drive. So, what would your memories be at?
Of learning to drive?
Well, of the whole process, you talked about the classroom a little bit, and then you had to do some driver's training, and obviously you and I drove around a lot, but you also had to do driver's training through the school. So, what was that experience like for you?
So I remember my first day of driver's ed. Before I even started the class, I had my mom take me and somebody else in the minivan up behind East Elementary in like this neighborhood right by the railroad tracks. And there's like this little area in the neighborhood where there was a playground. And she just let me drive around in circles there to kind of practice like the speed, how to accelerate, use the brake. This is before I even took a driver's ed class. I didn't even have to be behind the wheel. I just kind of wanted an idea because I always watched you. I always watched her. I learned like the mechanics and the rules of the road from her. Picking us up from school, how four-way stops, like just all that stuff. And then school, driver's ed school, I think was Monday nights, Wednesday nights, and some Thursdays, and then we would fit in some Saturday mornings. And my first one was it's I had like this my throat hurt, congested, just wanted to eat ice cream because I felt like crap. Like I couldn't even like my throat, everything just I felt like crap all day. Um, and so that's all I remember my first one. But we had to take 15 classes. I passed my writer's test on the 13th class because I wanted to take it early. Because one of my buddies in school said, like, I don't even take driver's ed, but I went in there and took the class and I passed it right away. Like, it's not that hard. You just gotta know what the signs are and some rules. And like the yield sign, the merge sign. There's a few other ones. And I think I got 1 point off. Like I got like 96% or 98% or something like that. So I passed right away. And then during my permit, I went and got my permit, took the picture, had that for 6 months. I think we had to do, I want to say 80 hours behind the wheel. I could be wrong on that. Everybody said don't even do it. They don't hand in that log, they don't hand in the journal. They don't care. The state of Wisconsin doesn't care. You don't even have to do it, but you really wanted me to. So like anytime that you weren't working, or confirmation, waiting for somebody to get done with confirmation, or you got done with work, or a Sunday, rain, snow, like day or night, like we were out driving. And I'm pretty sure we did the full 60, 80 hours, whatever it was. And you taught me like everything. Or Wednesday night, we're gonna go to this random parking lot. We're gonna park in a parking spot doing the left turn. We're gonna park in the spot doing the right turn, parallel parking, driving uphill. One time we were going to see where our my grandma lived, and we were driving down this this county road where there was like this KFC, and somebody was on my left, and I just felt uncomfortable, so I was like really hugging my right side, not knowing that there was someone in my right blind spot. So the whole van just got quiet, because I'm sitting there behind the wheel, but you wanted me to learn how to drive with other people in the car. And like, okay, you're gonna merge, so you have to speed up right away. So like I really appreciate and I have this conversation sometimes, like I really, really appreciate like your time that you took with me driving, because no matter what state or city I've been living in, like I still learn and have that comfortability of being behind the wheel, stoplights, interstates, toll roads, whatever it is, because of you. So yeah, my main thing, and then I passed my driver's ed, or I passed that class or that test on December 22nd, like 2 days before or one day before Christmas break, my sophomore or junior year. Um, had like this ice cream sundae to celebrate. Got a few points taken off. Didn't know where my high beams were, because he called them high beams. And like, if you've seen Boy Meets World, that principal, is what I remember this guy looking like. Whoever that guy's name is in the TV show, Mr. Fink. Like, I remembered that's what this guy was. And he's like, well, you got long hair on the side, so you really got to exaggerate when you're looking at your prefs. And like, you stop at a stop sign and you look all three ways and then you go. That's how you drive as a student. So he gave me like the heads up right away. Didn't know where my high beams were because I never heard them called high beams. They were always called brights, growing up. And so other than that, yeah, I mean, I passed my test. I just remember a lot of time at night and on Wednesday nights driving around with you. And sometimes you would be tired, so you start falling asleep, and I didn't know where to go. And I didn't want to wake you up, hoping a deer didn't run in front of like the van. But yeah, it's definitely something I still take to me this day, like those memories, and apply them. So I appreciate that. But I didn't get a car in high school. Uh, and like I'm glad of that because so many people just I could walk, I could bum a ride. Like it didn't matter. We lived right behind the high school. But yeah, that's all I really remember. I know that's a long-winded question, but or answer, but like that's kind of the steps of my class, my test, my behind the wheel test, and then getting that license. I was so excited, and then so many people are like, "Yeah, I got my license like over a year ago already." I was just late, like to the party, pretty much. But you mentioned once upon a time. I don't think this is the 70s. I don't think so at all. This car that you called the Beast. Like, what was this car?
Well, in 1983, I loaded up that 1966 Chevrolet Impala and drove to California. And I was in California maybe 2 or 3 weeks, and it was late at night. It was dark. This was like in February of 1983, and I worked in Palo Alto, California, which was not far from the campus of Stanford University. And I was driving to where I was staying in San Jose, which was about a half hour away. And all of a sudden, I hear this loud thump on the interstate that I was driving. I think I was on Interstate 5 in California. And I managed to get the car off the road and into a gas station, which just happened to be off the exit ramp. But the car was moving really slow. It was still driving, but it didn't have any power. And I managed to get it off the up the ramp to this gas station, and looked underneath the car, and I couldn't really see anything because it was pitch black. So I just asked the kid that was working in the gas station if I could leave it there until morning. And so I still had quite a ways to walk home. I tried to call the only guy I knew, the guy I was living with, and he and his wife were out on a dinner date, and so I had nobody else to contact. So I headed back on foot on Highway 5. And I don't know how many miles I walked, but I walked to San Jose on interstate in California at night, which is not something I would recommend back in 1983, and certainly wouldn't recommend it now. But I made it to where I needed to go. And in the morning, uh, my buddy and I went and looked at the car, and you could see that half of the engine had fallen out of the car and was laying on the ground. So I was driving this car with half the engine dragging, and I managed to get it, like I said, off up the exit ramp off the interstate to a gas station. And so they called the tow truck, and the guy said that, yeah, that probably can't get fixed. I mean, the A-frame rusted out, and you're going to have to get rid of the car. And I said, well, will you take the car? And he said, yeah, I'll take it. And and I said, well, how much do I have to pay you? And he said, no, I pay you for a junk car. So I think he gave me like $150 or $100 or something. Um, which I was happy with, even though I didn't have a car anymore. So um, my buddy and I just had to use his car because we both worked at the same place in Palo Alto. We worked at a Foot Locker selling shoes, and so eventually I got my tax return that my dad sent to me from Wisconsin. And and I answered a want ad for a 1970 Dodge Polara, and I paid $650 for it. And this guy was really good. He went down to the DMV with me and transferred ownership to me on his lunch hour, which was really cool because I had no idea where the DMV was in California. And this guy did this on his lunch hour for me. Um, don't remember his name, but just a super thing that he did to help me out. So my new car was a 1970 Dodge Polara, and I had that car um, all the way through leaving California, living in Colorado for a while, coming back to Minnesota, living in Wisconsin, going up to Staples, Minnesota, Alexandria, Minnesota. I had that car when I met your mom, and that's how I met your mother. That's kind of funny. Uh, and eventually, that car, I think, crapped out in 1991 when I was working in Amory, Wisconsin. It just crapped out one day on my way to work. And so that was it. So I had that car for 8 years, and my wife always called it the Beast because it was a huge car, and it was a good car, but it just started to have a lot of problems. It was 20 years old, and so that was the car that was known as the Beast. It was the Dodge Polara that I bought in Palo Alto, California, and owned for 8 years before it died in Amory, Wisconsin.
You said Polera?
Dodge Polara.
I'm
Yeah.
trying to look that up.
Yeah.
Polera.
It's Polora. I think that's how you spell it.
What year
Anyway,
was it?
what's that?
What year was it?
1970. It was kind of a brownish, a sparkly brownish color. Um, and I really love that car. I mean,
Like that?
yep, that was my Dodge Polara.
Hmm.
And and so that was and that's something that people kind of do. They kind of name their vehicles. My daughter has had two cars named Cheryl. She just has spelled it different. um, and I don't know, did you ever name your first car, Andrew, your Dodge that you had?
Yeah, I did. I had a Dodge Caliber, 2007 Dodge Caliber. I had that for about over 10 years. And yeah, I did have a name for that car as well. But my current car, no, I don't have a name for it.
So everyone, and I was going to ask you, the day of your driver's test, I we brought you over to Hudson, Wisconsin, to that's where the DMV was at the time, and where you had to go to get a road test. Do you remember that day? Do you remember being nervous that day going in and waiting your turn, waiting for him to call out your name, number? I don't remember how they do it, but do you remember being nervous before going out and doing your test?
I remember being just a little nervous of like whenever I'm doing anything new, I'm nervous about it. And my stomach kind of gets all like knotted up. But it's just like, man, we done this so much. And like you even took me to those roads and you're like, this is where you're gonna take the test. It's like this is the easy part of like the back roads in Hudson. So I was in the same minivan. I knew I was going to be, it was like on a Tuesday or Wednesday. So like I was going to show up to school late. We dropped everybody off and then you and I headed over there because I think my test was like at 10 a.m. or 11 a.m. I just filled out the paperwork. I don't know if I had to do fingerprints. Had all my stuff ready, but they didn't ask for any of it. And then seeing someone like take their picture to renew their license and seeing the blue backdrop, I'm like, that's gonna be me. Like, I'm gonna take my picture today. I'm gonna get this thing printed. Or maybe they send you a paper copy first and then you got the real thing in the mail. But there was a kid ahead of me. Didn't know where he is from, not New Richmond. I remembered the mom coming up to you. And like, I you introduce yourself, whatever. And she's like, "So Brian, is this your first time here?" And you're like, "Yeah, like it's his first test." And then she pointed at her kid walking out the front door and like held up three fingers, like this is his third try. And then when I heard that, like I was going to use the bathroom real quick, and I was just like, "Oh man, what is this test?" Like, because I heard somebody in my home ec, my foods class, like a month or two before, he failed because, as he said, he was like, I did a real person stop at a stop sign and kind of rolled through it because I was taking a right turn. Um, and then like the teacher like just stay your eyes on the road, over exaggerate everything. Um, I took a test one time with somebody there, and there was like a drug deal going on with two semi trucks. So don't get distracted by anything. Just do the driver's test. And so I remember hearing about that kid failing it, and I'm like, what the heck? Is this gonna be like a TV show where I'm wheeling inside of like cones and then they bring me on the interstate? Um, it was easy. I know I got some points taken off because I didn't look all the way, or I didn't look left and right as I was crossing through an intersection. And I think I got some points off for like I didn't turn my headlights off. I remember walking inside and he was like, "Is that minivan automatic?" I'm like, "Yeah." I mean, like most cars are nowadays because I didn't even think about it. I was just kind of so relieved for it to be done. And then we walk up to you at the counter. Like you walk up to the counter with us. He's like, "Well, Andrew, you passed, but this is what you did wrong." And like I didn't even hear what I did wrong at the time. I had to go back and read it because I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I passed." Because before I left, that kid came back in and looked at his mom and shook his head because he knew he didn't do it, or he like hit a curb or something like that. So apparently, if you hit a curb or stuff, like it's automatic, like, okay, let's go back. We're done. Um, it was really cold. There was ice, like snow everywhere, but like the roads were blacktop because it was kind of behind a hospital, so the roads were kind of nice back there. Um, and just him, I remember the guy just saying, once again, you have long hair, so really over exaggerate so I know what you're doing. Like go over the top with it so you look like a good driver. That's what I'm looking for. I'm like, all right, cool. Maybe stop at a stop sign for like 8 seconds just to be safe, like type deal. So yeah, I was nervous. I think you even let me drive back. I don't know. I remember you just dropped me off at school. I had to go right to my algebra 2 or geometry class, something like that. And I told everybody like I was sitting by. Yeah, pretty excited. And then I took the van like the next day or like 2 days later or something to go meet somebody. And so yeah, I was nervous only because that kid ahead of me, like his mom made it seem like the toughest thing in the world, and then he walks in like shaking his head no that he failed for like a third time. But then once I was in there and it kind of like, yeah, you passed. I'm like, thank goodness. Like I didn't want to be the kid that didn't pass because I told everybody you're going I'm going to be late to school because I gotta go take my driver's ed class. So yeah, I mean that's what I remember of like my story of like I just wanted to pass. I didn't care if I got 100%. Just all that time that we did behind the wheel and all those hours, I wanted to just pass on my first try. I didn't want to do it a second time. Like that wasn't even an option for me. So that's why I remember of that day in December.
Well, we all have our first memories of our driver's training, and it is such a process when you think about it, from doing the classroom stuff to getting your permit. Back when I got a permit, you just got a piece of paper. You didn't have a photo ID type thing like you did, Andrew. It was just a pink slip basically, and and then doing your road test or your road training, and practicing with your mom or dad, and then taking your test, and then finally getting your own car. And Andrew, how long did it take after you got your driver's license before you got your first car?
Um, over a year, over a year, because I took it, like, I think I took my driver's test end of 2010, 2010, I think, December 2009, December 2009, I think. And then I didn't get my car until graduated high school, saved up money wrestling, got a job at that convenience store you mentioned, and then was sick again, dropped off and everything. And then after Christmas break, it was like New Year's Day sales going on at dealerships. And it's funny how you were mentioning these old brown cars. I remember going to a dealership, not Bernard's, on the other side of Farm and Home, wherever that dealership was, and seeing this really old brown car, but I could afford it. I didn't have to put money down. I could just like get it that day. Really old looking. And like I went to work. It was a Sunday. We were looking at it, and I had to go work at 2 o'clock that Sunday afternoon. And remember listening to the Packer game on the radio and just sitting there like, I know it's affordable, but I don't think it'll last me a long time. And like it just looked old. So I'm not gonna lie. I was just like, I don't want to like I wasn't in high school at the time, but I was like, I just don't think it'll last a long time. And the car just looks old. I don't want to be driving that thing. And it seems so long inside, like the radio and the steering wheel, like everything just seems so stretched out, like the dashboard. But July or January 5th is when I got my car, went to the bank, put the down payment on it, took a picture of holding all that money for the down payment. Because it was like so much I had to take out of the bank. Was on the phone with the bank, getting my own loan, however old I was, and then they passed me. They approved me of the loan. Still to this day, I use that bank for my current car loan, and just like, oh wow, they accepted me. Like I did so you and my like you both my parents or both you guys helped. But like that was such like a proud thing that I felt like I did and I accomplished. And like I'm gonna pay this no matter what state I'm living in, I'm gonna pay this car off, which I did when I moved to Houston. So yeah, my stone white Dodge Caliber. Folded down the seats, hatchback, a lot of room, had a plug-in, like a normal wall plug-in in there. So I always thought that was so cool. Really proud of that car. And like it lasted me from 2012 until a hurricane in 2022. Yeah, 2022, over 10 years. Like I had that car. Um, if it was '07, that means it was probably made in 2005. Um, so yeah, it lasted a long time. Didn't really take out long trips afterwards, but like that was gonna be my question to you, a two-part question. What's the most mileage you ever put on a car? We'll start there, and now I ask my last question.
Well, the one van that's still sitting in my driveway, I haven't driven it for over 5 years. It's basically a storage unit right now. Um, but that's got 350,000 miles on it. And I think it had 100,000 uh, or close to 100,000 on it when I bought it. Um, and I don't remember what year it was, but yeah, that white Dodge Caravan is by far the most miles I've ever put on a vehicle at 250, and it is. I've had it paid off for a long time, but I basically bought that van twice because just about everything had to be during that 250,000 miles. Just about everything on that thing has been replaced, except the engine. But uh, every part of the engine, water pump, fuel pump, radiator, transmission, you name it, and everything on that van had been replaced at one point or another, except the engine itself. So, yeah, that the white van is by far the most miles I've ever put on a vehicle.
If that's 350,000, is it even drivable anymore?
Um, I don't know what it looks like underneath. Like I said, it's been sitting in the driveway for 5 years, and probably going to have to get it towed away. I doubt. Um, I doubt it's safe to drive. It's probably pretty rusty underneath. Um, I know there was a beehive under there a couple of years ago that your brother decided that he was gonna spray bomb and get rid of this. Well, they were hornets actually, and he thought he got them all after the first application, but he had to do it a second time. And I think he might have even gotten stung when he was doing that. and I don't know why he cared. I didn't care if there was a hornet's nest under there. I wasn't driving it anyway. But yeah, it's been sitting there a long time, and I've seen squirrels underneath there, and there's probably been critters that camp out underneath there, or up in the engine or whatever. I mean, I don't know. I haven't looked under there in a long time, so haven't tried to start it in a long time. So I really don't know what critters do with that van out there.
Who did that with the spray bomb in the wasp nest?
That'd be your brother Eric.
Okay, that sounds like a project he would want to do. Just in my last question, unless you have any other comments you want to say about driving your car, the first car, just in the 70s alone, what was a song that you remember from your first days of driving and training, or like being behind the wheel and having a car? What's like a song you remember?
Well, my the radio didn't work in that car, so I didn't have seatbelts and I didn't have a radio. And I drove that car to California, and I had a portable cassette player on the dashboard, playing all my favorite tapes, so my favorite music, and had a stash of batteries in case the batteries wore out on that cassette player. I think they took uh, size C batteries, four of them. So I had a bunch of batteries when I drove to California and all my tapes, and that's what I listened to because I had no radio. that's uh, that's how it went. Or actually, you know what? I was wrong about that. I did have no, no, no. I did not have a radio in that car, but in the Dodge Polara, I did have a radio. So um, uh, that was my second car. But no, that car I drove to California, I just had a cassette player, and that's what I listened to music on that. So don't have a particular song that I remember or associated with that car.
And is there anything else you want to say about cars or in the 70s or your buddies in high school to wrap up this week's episode?
Well, when now that you mentioned music, I think one of my favorite performers in the early '80s was this woman named Laura Branigan, and she's no longer with us. She died of a brain aneurysm several years ago, but she was a hot performer at the time, and my favorite song by her was called Gloria. And this song came out in 1980, I think. When I bought the Dodge Polara in Palo Alto, California, after I shook hands with the owner and gave him the money and drove away, I flipped on the radio. That's the first song I heard was Laura Branigan doing Gloria, and I thought this was the right deal. That this was the right thing because my favorite song by Laura Branigan was on the radio of a car I just bought in California.
Is it kind of hard not to think that? Like whenever you hear that song, do you just automatically think that?
No, actually, I just thought about it now because I had actually forgotten about that until you just asked me to associate a song with a car. So I had forgotten about that until just now. So no, it's not. I mean, I really like that car, but it wasn't a very good family car, and it wasn't until we started buying caravans, of which I've had. Let's see, I've had one caravan, a Windstar, a Kia Sedona, another caravan. So I've had three caravans, a Windstar, and a Kia Sedona, and they're all family vehicles, and that's what I spent a lot of time driving over 20 years of you guys growing up.
I know you didn't like that green Kia. Kia has way improved on what their car type is. Like, and they did everything. They did a whole turnover rate. So good for Kia. Maybe not the best winter vehicle at the time, but apparently way better. That green minivan had this heater in the back, like on the ground, that I would just lay on the floor next to it. That heater was so nice. Like, I just love laying next to it. That van got so warm and toasty. Um, unless like a hair of dirt got caught in it and then it stunk. And that was actually my next question. I asked you with the song, is there like out of curiosity, is there like a smell that brings you back to like your first days of driving
Um, no, not really.
or air freshener?
Other no, I'll never forget the smell when I burned out that engine for not having oil in the engine. That's a very distinctive smell of metal burning, which is what I did. There was no oil in the crankcase, and the engine burned, and that smell is very distinctive. So if I ever do that again, I'll know what it is right away. Hopefully I'm not stupid enough to ever burn out another engine because of lack of oil. But yeah, that I'll never forget that smell, Andrew, of metal burning as I was driving.
No, and it's like it's funny how you tell these stories of like your tire or a car, or someone having to pick you up or just hitching a ride and you being on the phone with your dad. You make it seem like you're so calm in like all of these stories. Um, Other than that first one that your grandparent, your grandpa had to like push back, like the part of the car. But like, were you that chill during all these things?
Um, no, losing that wheel was a little bit unnerving. I didn't call my dad until later on in that day, so I had calmed down quite a bit. And he was concerned that I was okay, and I said, "Yeah, I'm fine, but the car's not." So, um, we went back to that gas station, and we paid, or I paid for it, and and at that point, I just started driving that car until we got the brown car back. And, my dad wanted me to choose which one I was going to take. And he said he didn't care, but, that I had to pick one. So since the brown one had a new engine in it, I decided to take that one and eventually drove over to Minneapolis and went to college for a year and worked for another year or two before driving to Colorado or driving to California with it.
Any final thoughts about cars in the 70s? I know you said in the past, like my buddies and I would just drive from one end of town to another. Maybe there was drive-through movies, like whatever the case is. You want to talk about your first car, but I guess just memories of being behind the wheels or being with your buddies.
Um,
Take
I never, I've never really did any parade lapping with that car. I remember the year I went to Brown Institute in Minneapolis. Towards the end of the year, one of my classmates and I came out to Wisconsin one day, and we bought an inflatable raft at Farm and Home, and 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 just went and found like some bodies of water to float around in this raft. And we went back to school the next day and was telling everybody about it. And so one of our female classmates and her sister said, "Well, we'll come out with you." So like I don't know, a few days later, the four of us came out, and this time we had two inflatable rafts, and we we wound up parking at my grandparents' house in Star Prairie and got a ride um, north, about 5 miles north of Star Prairie. My grandpa dropped us off, and, and we inflated these rafts and went down the Apple River for about 2 hours. And then until the river brought us back to Star Prairie, right behind my grandma and grandpa's house. Although I didn't realize at the time it was their house, and we got caught in the rapids that brought us underneath that bridge right by the church there in Star Prairie, and me and the girl I was with, we managed um, to get off underneath the bridge and keep the raft from sailing away on us. But the other two people, they had a lot of trouble getting to the shore because the rapids were really kind of wild right there. So um, but we all got out of there safely and nobody drowned or we didn't lose anything. I think we lost one paddle, but that was it. and then we we went up on the bridge, walked back to my grandparents' house at the end of Main Street there, and got into the car and took off. But we had a really good day, and I think that was the only time I had more than one person or one passenger in that vehicle. Other than some stints in Minneapolis when I worked at Target, but for a road trip anyway, that'd be the only time. So that was a lot of fun, and all that happened in that 1966 Chevrolet Impala.
And this is episode in 66, 73, whatever years we're throwing around for cars. This is 38. This is episode 38. We wrapped up another episode of that 70s pod. No matter what's going on, always enjoyed doing these. Always enjoyed talking with you. Like I said, I had no idea what we were talking about. And when you text me, I'm like, okay, there's really no research I can do on this. I'm gonna sit there and learn. Known you my whole life. Didn't know about like you passing tests, you having that many car issues at the start, or you walking in 1983 San Francisco roads, which I had to Google just to see what San Francisco looked like at that time. And you just finding a payphone, do whatever you can. And you're right, like there's always that Jeff Foxworthy joke of like when you have a t-shirt, that's like a contract for life. Like I'm wearing this t-shirt until like it falls apart on me. And that's how I feel like you are with cars. I suppose I would have done that with my Dodge Caliber if that hurricane didn't like flood the inside of it. Got it shampooed, got it cleaned out, but my insurance was like, there's wires underneath the carpet. Like that's gonna mess with the radio and the engine and trans. Like that's gonna mess with so much stuff and soon, and we're not gonna cover it. So maybe I had to get that hard lesson. But I probably would have kept on driving that car, even though my new car brings like so much more possibilities of like where I could go and feeling comfortable driving on the interstate and driving to and from Tampa. So I'm grateful for that. It's always sad seeing cars go, but whatever possessional items doesn't matter. It's always sad when we're ending up another episode, but can look forward to next week, episode 39. Don't know what we're going to talk about yet. Like I said, this was like a last minute thing for me. You're texting me all this stuff about Kiss music, and I'm like, well, we already did Kiss Destroyer episode. Can we do one just on Kiss? Is it going to be music? Like I was so confused where that was going. But glad we're doing this episode today. Like I said, episode 38. We have our sponsors. I'm not going to run through them. Just you can see them down in the chat, the description below. And this is on YouTube. I will say that. Subscribe to That 70s Pod on YouTube with Bryan Lee. And I don't want to get into it real quick, but we do talk about NFL, and I can't just sit there and shake my head at how um not fun. Not fun watching. Didn't care for any of the games. Any game that I turned on and won and watched, it went the opposite way of what I wanted to see. Still gonna watch the Super Bowl. That got me. But not a fan of this Final Four. Don't want to say the whole scripted route, but like I just don't care for it. Whatever. I guess you have some good years and then you have some bad years. But you mentioned something earlier about I forgot how you were talking about talk with your driver instructor talking about the tennis and people getting eliminated from a tennis bracket, and that made me wanted to. We're like, oh yeah, we always talk about weather, and then we talk about the NFL playoffs, and we totally glossed on it. We totally missed that today. Do you even care about this Final Four, real quick?
Well, the uh, the four games last weekend, I only got one right, and that was the Kansas City game, and and Kansas City didn't even play particularly well. Um,
No.
and they might have their hands full with Buffalo. Maybe Buffalo will finally figure out a way to beat Kansas City and go to the Super Bowl. Um, so that would be one positive way to look at that matchup. The other, the negative way to look at that matchup is I'm tired of Kansas City and Buffalo playing all the time for to see who goes to the Super Bowl. It's gotten boring and just kind of tired of it. On the other side, even though the Commanders beat your team, the Buccaneers, a game you were at, um, you got to kind of root for them. I mean, they went into Detroit and kicked some ass, and they did a really good job. This Jaden Daniels kid you know, more than likely will be rookie of the year. And I think Washington's coach probably will be coach of the year. I thought for a while it might be the Vikings coach, but I think this Washington coach is gonna get it. Uh, they they know Philadelphia backwards and forwards. They play Philly twice every year, and they split the season series this year. And yeah, I could see Washington win it, but they got to contain Saquon Barkley. Barkley just ran all over the Rams. I really wanted the Rams to win because I was just rooting for the city of Los Angeles right now. Uh, but once it started snowing in Philadelphia, the Rams couldn't hold on to the football. They couldn't catch passes. They couldn't stop Saquon Barkley. So they were just out of their element. But Washington is more used to cold weather and snowy weather. So whatever happens in that game with Philadelphia on Sunday, Washington's going to be ready for it. I'd like to see them win. At least there's somebody different in there this year. I'm tired of seeing Philadelphia in the NFC Championship game as well, or the 49ers, or, whatever. At least 49ers didn't even make playoffs this year, so that wasn't an issue. But Philadelphia always seems to be in there, and they just played Kansas City in the Super Bowl 2 years ago. So I really don't want to see a repeat of Philadelphia and Kansas City. So let's root for Buffalo and Washington and a repeat of the Super Bowl that was held in 1991 at the Metrodome in Minneapolis.
I don't like the Bills. I don't like Josh Allen, but like I don't know, like I'm sick of the Chiefs. Same thing that you said, Chiefs and Bills. I'm sick of that. It was like the Patriots and Colts. I felt like we had to watch Tom Brady and Peyton Manning so many times, and then we always had to watch like the Giants against the Eagles, or I mean, throwing the Ravens, throwing the Chargers, that was always interesting. But yeah, I'm sick of like if they want to do this three-peat for the Chiefs, okay, that's cool. It's history. Don't care. But like I said, don't care for Bills and Josh Allen because I always give Miami a hard time. But only because we talked about the Super Bowl a few weeks ago and you said that story about the 1991 of dealing with Washington and Buffalo fans and how interesting that was. I remember hearing that story and like Bills in Washington for real? And you're like, well, they were good in the 90s. Like that 91 Washington team is no joke. And so to see that, I mean, they won in Tampa and they won in Detroit. So home field advantage doesn't matter. They're going to figure out a way for it, even if it comes out to the wire. So I could easily see them winning it. I don't want to see Eagles and Chiefs as well. Eagles and Bills, like I said, I would still watch it, but I don't even know who I would want to see that. So unfortunately, even though they beat the Bucks while I'm sitting there working the game, I mean they won by a field goal. So yeah, I'm kind of. It would be nice to see Washington make it and win. I know Bills have never won a Super Bowl, but like if I can see Washington beat Buffalo, actually I don't even care if they. I just don't want to see Eagles and Chiefs. Period. It kind of sucks. This is the Final Four for how excited I was when the playoffs started, and now this is what I ended up with. It seems like that happens a lot, but just want to get your take on it before we wrap up this week's episode. Always interesting. Who are you going to pick then for this weekend?
Well, I haven't really decided yet. You got to thank the Commanders for pumping some new blood into the playoffs this year because Philadelphia, Buffalo, Kansas City, they're there every year in the respective conference championships. So Washington hasn't been in an NFC championship game in 30 years. So this is, I guess it's actually more than that if it was 1991. So this is a big deal. What is that, 34 years? Yeah. So this is a big deal for them. And they haven't been in the Super Bowl for a long time. So obviously they haven't won a Super Bowl in a long time. And good for them. Like to see them keep going, but I think Philadelphia has too many weapons. Even with Jalen Hurt being injured, um, I think Philadelphia at home is just going to be too much to overcome. So I'll probably go with Philadelphia there, and I think Buffalo is finally going to figure out a way to beat Kansas City. Even though I there's never been a team that's won three straight Super Bowls, and I'd like to see that happen. I just don't think it's going to happen this time. I think Buffalo's going to figure it out and finally knock Kansas City out of this Super Bowl race.
Who'd you say was injured from the Eagles?
Jalen Hurt, the quarterback.
Oh, gotcha. That's right. That's right. Well, yep, I agree with everything you said. I mean, the Ravens were the better team. I don't care what you say. Defense looked good for Buffalo, but the Ravens were a better team. They just dropped that 2 point conversion. But I could easily see like Lamar Jackson, you know, Henry, all those guys making the Super Bowl. They should have. And like I picked them for the past couple years since 2019, and it's something that always happens. But something you can be sure on no matter what we're going to record, and we're going to be here every week. This is wrapping up episode 38. Brian, I thank you for your time. I love you very much. And I always appreciate recording with you no matter what we're talking about. Check out the sponsors below, like, share, and subscribe. Comment if you want to see a certain episode or talk about a certain item or topic of the 70s. I'm signing off from Orlando, and you guys have a good night. Take it away, Brian.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everyone. We'll have another topic next week. Again, remembering that people in Los Angeles are still dealing with that situation, and and God bless all those people. Just a horrible situation there, and for people down south dealing with snow and not knowing how to drive in the wintertime, whether it's in Texas or Georgia or communities that don't even have snow plows. Just if you don't know what you're doing out there on the road, just stay home. It's you don't have to be anywhere if you don't know how to drive in it. So don't endanger your life by doing anything stupid. And as always, thanks for listening. We'll have another topic next week. Either next week or the following week, we're going to do the 1980 Olympic hockey team, which mostly was a 1979 hockey team because they got ready for the Olympics in the year before 1980. So that's why we're going to feature them on one of these programs either next week, probably the following week. So that'll probably be our episode 40. So not sure what we're going to do next week, but in 2 weeks, we're going to be doing the Olympic hockey team. So have a good week, everyone, and we'll talk to you again next time.